Hello, everyone.
Hi, David. Wonderful. We've got Caleb as well. Good. And the meeting notes. Excellent.
David, do you attend literally every single one of these meetings, or is there one of them that's like not in your repertoire? David Wheeler? He's not here. He's here, but he just can't hear me.
Oh, look, I thought it was unmuted. So let me try again.
There you go.
I attend all I can.
There you
So
go.
I consider it a form of penance. So
What did you do wrong? Is it a past life thing, or is it a present life thing that you have to atone for?
you know, actually, I say that jokingly. I am actually honored. I'm very excited about the things that OpenSSF is doing. So I'm basically here. I cannot do everything, but I'm trying to be supportive and help where I can. And it's not the only thing I do, but it's one of the things I do is try to be supportive of each of the working groups to help them pull stuff over the transom, as it were. And also connect up, because I'm aware not everybody can show up at everything. I can't either. So where I can point out, oh, look, that group is doing this. So don't depend on me as being the sole way of that happening, but I try to be a way.
Makes sense.
I always appreciate your participation, David, and especially your note taking as well.
Speaking of which, I just saw a link. I think it's the 0MQ. Yeah, I'll repost, because I think some people have not slipped in their names, and we want to know who shows up.
I'm cooking. Can somebody do me a favor of adding me?
Which me is this? Jonathan, is that the you me?
That's me, Jonathan likes you. Yeah. Hi.
Okay. Excellent. All right, I will add you, although I will admit the spelling of your last name may defeat me, but I will do my best.
It's Leitschuh, Leitschhuh.
Nope, somebody else has.
There you
There
go.
you go.
It's German. My mother used to joke that it's German for keep your maiden name.
Your mother has a sense of humor. I love it.
Yes, she did. She very much did.
Wonderful. Well, we're at 5 past the hour. So on that note, yes, please add yourself to the attendees. And if you have anything that you'd like to talk about today, feel free to throw something on the agenda. And notes are always welcome as well, contributions to taking notes. We like to typically start off with any new faces or anyone who might be new, whether this is your first or maybe one of your first meetings. We always love to have introductions and say hello to the new faces. Because thankfully we do seem to be growing and have more people joining meetings. So we'd love to hear from you. Okay, maybe no new faces today. Okay. Okay, wonderful. So no. Okay, next on the agenda, we have Caleb, who's going to give us an update on the criticality score and package analysis projects. Quickly, before I hand it off to you, Caleb, this is a good time to mention that, yeah, one thing that we'll definitely get in the habit of doing is providing updates, regular updates on all the different projects and kind of different efforts associated with the work group regularly. So we can all stay abreast on latest developments and updates there. So with that, Caleb, the floor is yours.
I'll hit the right button. Hello, how's everyone going?
Hey.
It's been a while. Unfortunately, the time zone in winter is not great for attending these meetings, which actually is one of the first things I'll mention, and maybe this is for discussion later, is maybe I think it's the securing software repos or one of the others kind of alternates between EMEA friendly and APAC friendly. And maybe that's something to consider in this group so that I can have a shorter lead time on delivering some of these updates. Yeah. So anyway, that's just a question maybe for the end. Yeah, so I'll dive in. On the criticality score side of things, I posted to Slack recently a milestone 1 doc up on GitHub. I haven't had any comments on that yet, except I think Arnaud, and I can't pronounce his name, Arnaud from IBM has given me some comments. And yeah, I was wondering, first of all, had anybody looked at that and got any thoughts and feedback? I'm looking for just I want to make sure that we're heading on the right direction. So I've built in the doc, it talks about an enumerator that generates a whole bunch of repos from GitHub. I've implemented that and it works well. I've got a prototype signal collector working as well. But yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm heading on the right track and that there isn't anything that I've missed, or any use cases in particular that I need to take into account, particularly as I consider maybe a milestone 2.
For those of us who have not read the document, can you give a high-level description of what we may have not seen?
I can, yes. So prior to this doc, I also wrote a it was logged as an issue, but it was talking about signal collection, some of the issues with the existing criticality score project and how it collects and some of the metrics. At the end, it proposed an approach to improving the score overall, where we basically make it scale to the point where we can run this automatically in the cloud, generating signals that people can look at. And there seems to be an interest in kind of experimenting and seeing how it works rather than just spitting out a number. So yeah, so this is kind of moving towards a stage where we can have this score being updated continuously, and that the data that it produces is all publicly available for people to look at. So the milestone 1 document talks about like a first step in that, where I'm rebuilding the project around this idea of enumeration, like an enumerator that's separate to a thing that collects the signals. So the enumeration is where we just list all the GitHub projects or GitLab projects, or we might have something that in the future goes around and Google Docs for random cgit hosted repositories on the internet. So, and then it passes that list of enumerated projects into a signal collection phase, which then goes and generates all of the raw signals used to generate the criticality score. And then at the end, after that, the output is then fed into something like a BigQuery table for querying and the scoring itself. So the milestone 1 talks about, so it's got an enumerator, talks about the implementation of that and the algorithm for how to extract the GitHub repos, and some other sources of data we may look at. The raw signal collection just talks about the data format and how that approach will generally work. And just a rough algorithm, a data format, and then a rough mention of BigQuery ingestion. And the final thing is, it talks about we're switching to Go. There has always been some alignment between the scorecard project and criticality score. With the White House Summit last week, that alignment is stronger. If you've read the document, there's a stream 2 where it talks about these projects merging. I'm not sure what that will look like in the future, but I'd already been thinking about trying to leverage a lot of what they've done for the criticality score side of things. So at the end, we talk about rewriting it in Go to make that transition easier in the future. So yeah, that is the briefest of overviews. Yes, would love to get some feedback, particularly around use cases in terms of how are people using this tool? How are people interested in using this tool? What questions are people trying to answer? Yeah, because that will help set the direction for where it goes in the future. And it also like encourages people to get involved and collaborate if the tool is actually solving their needs rather than what we imagine they might be. So I don't know if anyone's got anything.
I can give a use case.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm an open source security researcher. I leverage code. I'm sorry, I'm cooking, so my camera's off. But I'm leveraging it. CodeQL is being used to, find by security researchers to find widespread common security vulnerabilities in open source. One of the things you kind of want to do is, you have a bunch of open source projects. You want to write a CodeQL query that finds those projects that are vulnerable. Great, this project is vulnerable, but is it even worth reporting to, right? And criticality score can help be that, yes, this is worth reporting to. No, this is somebody's one-off project they developed as like a college project. We don't, it's not worth your time or nobody's using it, that sort of thing. So that's the use case that I have. That is, I believe other researchers may have that same use case too.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I hadn't considered that one. That's really good. Just for publicness sake, Arnold from IBM had said that they are using it to measure the criticality of open source components that they consume. And I think that's interesting, certainly to other big companies as well. So not necessarily having a big public table is super useful, but being able to identify, I guess, their exposed risk is interesting as well.
Yeah, and to piggyback a little bit off of Jonathan's point too, as you know, in this work group and beyond, we'll hear more about the White House DC updates as well. But it's very important to have some kind of quantitative measurement of something that we can point to when we are looking at prioritizing projects to audit or to review from a security perspective. So having a tool like Criticality Score, I would say, is extremely helpful in that case, because it can give us one more kind of layer of essentially validating that these projects that we are interested in auditing, for example, are indeed, critical to some measurable degree.
I think that's kind of the core use case that's been kind of had in mind the whole time, is certainly being able to address those, like where do we focus our attention at in terms of the most important.
Looks like Abhishek, you have your hand up.
So I also had a question regarding the Harvard census study on how we can leverage or interoperate these projects together, because there is definitely a lot of value in the census study because it gets industry usage data points. I was wondering how we can develop or have this data communication between these two projects and leverage each other. So if anyone has thoughts, please share.
That's a great question.
Jonathan, you might. I did have a comment, which is that there was another research student in the Slack channel asking about the project as well, and I think at the very least it needs to be runnable by research students and researchers to be able to actually get the data. I think it's very hard to use the existing Python tool. So, but yeah, I think there's a lot more we can do in that sort of collaboration around research.
Yes, and I believe when the results were being presented, a lot of inquiries did come about, is the data going to be accessible in in a way that it can be kind of manipulated and analyzed. And so I don't know if anything came out of that, if David, if you have anything there, but being able to have the data in kind of like in a format where it can be analyzed or cross-referenced with criticality score or something, I think is something that is certainly doable.
I think Jonathan has his hand up.
Jonathan.
Just a quick thought. So you said scraping the internet for, are you looking at, for example, if a package or project name ends up in the news a ton, right? Like LeftPad, it's an indication that a project that may have not come up as critical it just broke the internet or something like that, like, oh hey, this might actually be more critical than we thought it was. Is that something that's is included in the criticality score? That like we missed a thing, but the news is making it very apparent that this thing is critical. We didn't realize it.
Yeah, I think the same thing happened with Log4j as well. Like, how come
Right.
this wasn't on our radar? And I like, it's certainly, these data points are interesting because you can look at the output of the score and go, all right, this is what it's saying. But without actual, it's going to take occasional incidents like that to like help you go, well, is our score correct? I think this is where things like Harvard Census can also be useful, where you get somebody else's research and compare it to what you're producing and say, well, why is it different? And so I think that is something that certainly needs to happen. And part of the orientation, why the project is oriented towards this BigQuery data set is so these questions can be more easily asked and addressed and investigated. So yeah, by being able to like publicly mess around with how the algorithm works and the weighting and things like that, I think we can hopefully get to a point where these are easier to detect and fix and improve. There's lots of questions. I think, does that answer, Jonathan, your question? And then I think David's next.
Yeah, so having done this criticality analysis before myself and for Census 1 and involved in the Harvard work on Census 2, I have opinions having gone through and received arrows. So first of all, I mean, it's important to understand, I mean, that, all systems have strengths and weaknesses. The criticality score fundamentally is mostly about how active the project is. I know there are other metrics, but really, if it's super active, it's going to get a high score. If it's not active, it's going to get a low score. I know there's more metrics, Caleb, so it's just more complex than that. But that's, I mean, it's heavily weighted towards that. It's not completely insane because if something is very, very active with lots of users, it must be important to a lot of folks. But of course, the problem is if it's inactive, that doesn't mean it's unimportant. It may be widely used, just not changed often. And I mean, if indeed there's ways to improve and add metrics and weight it, that's great. But we tried to do something similar on Census 1, and I think at the end of the day, you have to take multiple data inputs and also add some human intelligence. That's so. For example, Census 2 takes a different tack where it looks at what's dependent. That does raise out actually the Log4j right away. I mean, Log4j shows up really high on the list because so many projects depend on it. And so my view right now is that what we need to do, and really this is, in my mind, this is the primary purpose of this group. So we need to move eventually from discussing it to making a decision on the new process and executing it. We need to take multiple data sources. So I actually do think that a lot of activity does suggest that it's important, unusually large amount of activity. But that can't be the only signal. High dependency, that seems like a pretty important signal. Other signals, which Census 2 doesn't work with, although Census 1 did, is what's the risk level of it? So it may be widely used, but by golly, they really do try hard. I'll put the Linux kernel, by the way, in this camp. It's not that it has no vulnerabilities. Greg KH has a funny saying where he says he's probably written more vulnerabilities than most people. Because when you write a lot of code that is in in memory unsafe language where any mistake at all can be a big disaster, it's not hard to be in a problem. But they at least make some real attempts. They have various processes that make a try. Whereas a lot of dead projects that lots and lots of people depend on, I worry about a lot. It's 100,000 lines. No one has edited in 3 years, which would mean I have a low criticality score. And everybody depends on it. Now, I'm getting worried. So basically, what we need to do, and we've already talked about this before, is combine the signals, then use humans to make adjustments. I'll give you before I get Chris, I will definitely give you your turn. But Census 1, one of the things that showed up really high in our scoring regime were the mail transfer agents. And the reason was we were waiting things like direct access to internet. Check. They were all written in C. No memory safety. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. Some of them were not maintained as well as you would like them to be. And so, they met all the criteria, but here's the challenge. How many people install their own MTAs? 40 years ago, quite a number. Now, not so much. It's pretty unusual.
I mean, the recent spat of Exchange vulnerabilities did prove that mail protocols are fraught with.
A fair retort. You actually that's a fair reply. But we were trying to emphasize the wide use. And so we just, basically the numbers told us what. So maybe this is a bad example because you've got a good retort. But my broader point though is that the numbers can tell us one thing, but we know other things that can make some adjustments. And so what I think we should do is use multiple measures, try to identify that list of things that are likely to be important in some semi-mechanical form, and then use humans to kind of filter it out and create our updated criticality list. We have a draft list. It was created quickly. We all agreed that we needed to do a better job. I'm sorry. I know there's at least one person who complained, and rightly so, about the speed, but we really need those answers in a hurry. I'm grateful for that. We can do better, but we need to actually decide on how we're going to do that. Thanks.
I'll just mention, sorry, I was just going to mention that Jarks is suggesting a voting as a source of criticality, and Julia is talking about engaging experts in communities. So
yes, I know Jacques has done a lot of work trying to figure out a better way to voting. I don't know if we'll get there, but yeah, I'm aware that there is work in progress. I just want to move on from thinking about the process to writing it down and starting executing it sooner rather than later, just because I'm afraid we'll keep drawing forever.
Sorry, Chris.
That's fine. Sorry, Caleb. So, and thanks, David. I agree with almost everything you said. I did want to sort of highlight, though, I think, well, number one, Log4j didn't show up that high, actually. It was like 40. And that's, right? It's not like, as critical. And I think that the problem with it, and it was hinted at with the Exchange comment, I think, is that there's an awful lot of dark matter, if you will, in terms of dependencies where things are consumed into products that then are widely used. And I think there's a transitive property to the dependency that we're probably not factoring in appropriately, and that is where something is a tertiary dependency, or where something is doesn't have a whole lot of open source dependencies but is used everywhere, right? And Log4j is an example of something like that. If you're if you have a lot of Java applications, then you probably had an awful lot of Log4j. And that doesn't show up in the study, right? Because it's
yes,
not
it does.
Really
it does actually. No, it does. They use information on proprietary software's dependencies to develop Census 2.
Where do they get that?
Yeah, it's in the report.
Okay.
What they did is the SCA vendors analyzed software, most of which was proprietary, and used that as their top level, and then tracked the dependencies down. Your point is correct that it's awful. Dark matter is a problem. I think the Log4j, you're right. I don't remember the number 40. I believe it's 40. I think what that showed is there's another logging system that if it had been subverted, it would have been even more disastrous. There's a competitor to Log4j that if you use that, if that had been subverted, it would have been even worse.
Yeah, and so I did want to sort of highlight that aspect of the sort of the transitive property of dependencies. And then I think the other thing to factor in here, at least from my own perspective here, and I think that of IBM's, is that I'd like to be able to use a tool like Criticality Score in the context of my own set of use cases. In other words, I'd like to be able to influence either the weighting of what things we consider to be more or less, critical to be worried about, or I should say, and we probably would also like to factor in when we talk about, again, dependencies. I think it's great to understand where it's used in the external world, of other open source, but I would like to understand where it falls in terms of usage in my own enterprise. And if I can get a census through an SBOM, curation of our own either consumed or, produced software, I'd like to be able to run criticality score against that set of dependencies to understand where my risk profile is and where maybe I should be investing my own resources. So again, I understand, it is somewhat competing with what we have from an OpenSSF perspective, where we're looking sort of more broadly and where it's sort of like trying to rally the entire open source community. But there's also, if you will, a selfish interest that I would like to understand, how critical is Log4j in my own circumstance? Not so much, maybe everybody's using it, but maybe I don't use it at all, or vice versa, right? Maybe it's something that very few people use, but IBM uses very heavily. And I'd like to be able to understand that. So being able to either give it different data sources for something like dependencies and so forth, I think would be valuable. That's really my point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And it's the internal private corporations using this tool is certainly a very interesting use case that was just brought up to, like IBM, I think your counterpart in Europe, Arnaud, brought up to me, Chris. So I think that's a really interesting use case. I think in terms of the general broader sense, like understanding how end products, both publicly open source or internal to organizations, used would be a fantastic signal to be using. Like it gives you a better sense of the true criticality of a particular project. I don't think the XPDF people really understood that their what's a JPEG big whatever algorithm it was going to get exploited by an Israeli security firm the way it did. Yeah, and no one understood the breadth of that issue because it's in every iPhone, and it's hidden under the surface. So I think being able to, I think the move towards having SBOMs, I think even thinking about having machine parsable license files, because they are required to be open source, may help in these spaces where we can start to collect more data from corporations. There may even be a way we can have like a zero knowledge or some way to for companies to submit like SBOM-ish type data to the project as a signal source without kind of disclosing that they're the organizations that use those dependencies as a way to further incorporate into the public algorithm as well. So they're ideas that I've had. They're kind of long down the track, but I think there's opportunities there as well. We can further improve a sense of how widely something is used. But at the moment, we have to use the kind of the data that's available to us in terms of the public space. So, yeah.
If I could respond to Chris Ferris's, Chris, I think you earlier on said, "Hey, I've got a somewhat selfish desire." I presume you're thinking about specifically for IBM. But you know what? I don't think that's unique. My understanding.
I didn't mean to say that it was unique. I'm just saying, as somebody who's responsible for a corporation's security, I have a certain interest, but I'm sure there are many out there like me. So
yeah. Well, actually, let me give you a counterexample, which I think is interesting, which shows how broad it is. I think the U.S. government is especially interested in that because they want to know about, and not just within I think there's actually two use cases for them. One is I'm the U.S. government, what's internal. Yep. And I am looking at the critical infrastructure of the nation I govern and what's important. Yeah. And I, by the way, I think those are going to be different answers. And so I don't think I want to redo the analysis, but with a slightly, with a different scope is at all irrelevant. So here's what I would like to propose as a counter proposal. I'm a little afraid that we have these discussions about what we'd like our our criticality, our improved criticality system process to be looking like, but I don't see a new process. So here's what I would propose, Amir. I would propose that we start trying to write a short kind of basic requirements document. You know, we did a criticality analysis once. We have some draft results. We know that was done quickly. We know there are problems with it. We would like to do better. Why don't we try to list some of the requirements that that new process would have, and then we can try to actually create that process? Does that seem like a way forward? Because I'm just afraid we're going to keep talking, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm on the same boat with you. I'm action oriented as well. We could definitely create a template to put at the top of our work group's notes, so that it's something we can easily refer to. And I think is we should definitely start getting stuff down on paper and working on it. Maybe even having like a more intensive working group session on that in particular. But I'm in agreement here. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Amir. I think we, right now we're talking about the criticality tool, which is a separate from the identifying critical projects process, which
Right.
is another project in our working group. I think we need to have a advertised meeting for any kind of proposal on that topic. But yeah, I agree.
Well, I think we can. I mean, that's one of the key outputs supposedly of this group. I mean, supposedly it's already done one,
Yeah.
but so I would say this is just part of the normal working group meet. I mean, I'm trying to jump in a little bit. You guys are chairs, but
Yeah.
I'd like to move on that. And if you
So
want, I can put in
yeah,
a couple lines on the top, and you can beat it up. But I just
yeah,
don't want to get stuck.
I agree. One of the things I'm thinking about, and I'm sorry, Caleb, maybe we should talk about this in another section, but I got a lot of feeling with vocabulary from the TAC that if it's something that's like a project with an output, it needs to be, and I think we will get a little more support if we call our identifying a project with identified leads and status, and maybe we do the project in the working group meetings. Yeah, but let's get this project a little bit more formal. It's the first bullet on our README for the projects in this working group, and I think we can have to advertise to the TAC that this is an official project, or SIG, whatever it's called these days, and have leads and have project updates and proposals under this umbrella instead of just under the working group.
Sure. The rule, as I understand it, is project if it has code, SIG if it doesn't have
Yeah.
code.
Okay.
I think so. I mean, it's up to you.
Yeah, it wouldn't be new. It's just formalize what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Formalized, project SIG to identify. And I guess the issue here is our critical OSS projects, at least globally, though
Yeah.
though the process may be reusable.
Yeah. And I think the first step is kind of, we've had a lot of input in the group, in these meetings, for ideas, for proposals, for what we'd like, but we really need some people to step up and say that they will lead the project. Some people that have submitted those ideas if they want, and then those people can kind of make those, I want to say executive decisions, but decisions that this is what we're going to do if we don't have any other way to go.
Yeah, that sounds good. So process for identifying critical projects document. Okay.
So Amir, did you just volunteer or?
Yeah, I'll take lead on kind of
Okay.
on kind of the high level stuff, but if I need help, I'll gladly take volunteers. And I definitely agree with you on that, Jeff, that it certainly makes sense to, I always go back to the same example. Sorry if it's annoying by now, but where the buck stops essentially is knowing, where that decision point is and who's responsible for making that decision or moving things forward. It's really important to establish that.
Yeah,
I guess this is a SIG since it's not code per se. Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
I'm not sure
code,
on
all
the,
code. Yeah, I'm not so sure. I'm pretty sure it's not all code, but if it has code in it, it's a project. So, okay. All
I'm
right, what
happy
are we
to
gonna
be.
call it?
I'm happy to be involved as well in this process, and I think and I think maybe it's worth talking about this in a separate meeting. But yeah, you're waving your hand.
Yeah, I will gladly be involved too.
Yeah, and it'd be great. I'd love to have someone from IBM too, because you guys are using this. So either Chris or Arnaud. And it's probably worth pinging Jarks and Julia as well, because they've had a lot of investment in this space. It's probably worth moving on, because I really want to get to the Washington stuff at the bottom.
okay. Did you have, did we do the package analysis update as well, Caleb?
No, I'm happy. So there was a blog post published on the OpenSSF. We basically giving it an announcement. It's running it's running reliably at the moment, generating signals, which is great. And the post was to drive attention and try and get some more public interest and contributors. We've had some people trying to run the project, which is great. So yeah, hoping that it will get some public contributions. And I think having some people trying and running it has shown us that probably need to make the ergonomics for new users a bit better. But yeah, it's basically the start. If you're using stars as a metric, it's gone from 40 to over 400, which is nice to have that improvement in attention. We recently added DNS data to what it captures, which is good. And yeah, still haven't quite decided what's next. We can improve dynamic analysis, which is probably what we'll do some more work on. But and also love to integrate more with some of the stuff the MalOSS and Georgia Tech guys are doing. Yeah, but yeah, reach out if you have any more to talk about. Naveen?
Yes. Is the data available in BigQuery? I didn't see anything in that, but I did see code for that, but I didn't see, at least in the README section, on that question.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll add the link if it's not in the README to it, and I'll ping you out outside the meeting.
Yes, that'll be good, because now the depths are there, scorecard, everything is in BigQuery. Obviously, this data now, this would be a great point to bring everything together. So that would be something that'll be really good.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find a link and stick it in the notes, and I'll also add it to the README in the project.
Yes, that'll be
I'll
good.
ping you offline to make sure you get it.
Absolutely, thank you.
In
sorry.
general, README is the best.
Yes, I know. It saved so many questions, at least for at least every time somebody asks a question. Caleb, I also have another question, totally low. I remember you mentioning on taking the criticality score, moving to Go and using some of the scorecard. So are you planning to use the scorecard code? What is the do you want to use a library, or what is the I'm trying to understand that.
Yeah, so we're leveraging some of their logic around GitHub token usage at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I didn't want to write that myself.
Absolutely.
There is a lot in common between the projects. That's they're basically scanning public repos. Although you could argue that the scorecard project depends on knowing what the critical projects are to kind of prioritize those.
Yeah.
Whereas the criticality score is about finding them. But I mean, you could argue about that. But yeah, there's a lot in common in terms of what they're trying to do. And so it makes sense to try and leverage the like as much as we can between the two. Initially, it's they're kind of separate, but I think the reason I've tried to write it like in Go and more modular is so that bits can be moved into scorecards, or like can be more alignment between the two, and we can generalize things that are in common between both at the very least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
the
I think
area.
I think that's an important step.
Yeah. Because like, right now scorecards not being used as a library anywhere else other than All-Star. Just wanted to understand that is something, another critical point that's coming to scorecard. That's another reason. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah, and we do meet with the Azim and
Sure.
Laurent on the scorecard side, and I'll try and make it to the working groups as well for that, as time permits.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Caleb, is that all? Oh yes, please go ahead.
That's all for me. Yeah. Unless
Okay.
Just
Thanks
for
so much, Caleb.
so for the criticality store, if that was offered as a REST API, like I know that it's in Bigtable. I know that the Bigtable data is there, but if there was an easy way to just like be able to pull the latest version of that stuff, just like via, even if just CSV off of a REST endpoint, that'd be really helpful, I think, for some people that want to build apps off of that. If it was, you didn't need to download it with Bigtable first.
in terms of criticality score, yes, we can do that.
Cool, because I usually end up like looking at the, I was like, oh, it's served from here, great. But like, if that was just an API you could hit and get, would be convenient.
Wonderful. So moving along, I'll do my update really quickly because yes, I'm sure everyone is very excited to hear about some of the updates from the Security Summit in DC, David. For the Managed Audit Program, so we are about halfway through with the initial projects that we had proposed to audit, thanks to funding from Google and OpenSSF. We are expecting to publish results coming up pretty soon, looking at around Q2. So hopefully by the end of next month. Thinking ahead, what we did was to kind of iterate that list of 25 projects. We updated that, taking into account the full Harvard Census 2 study and any other data points that we were able to get. And have an updated list of projects that's currently at about 50. So it's a larger pool of projects to go through, and ideally can serve as a data point for aggregation. And in terms of next steps, so as I mentioned, we've got some results coming through the pipeline. Really excited to get those results out for everyone to see and see some of this work that we're doing, as well as kind of validating this new list of projects and putting proposals together. So that list of 50 projects, I did add it to our existing list as a new tab. So I'm just going to link that here. And if anyone would like to discuss or have comments, feel free to, would love to hear your feedback. So that's just a quick brief update on the Managed Audit Program and the work that we're doing. And that we can go over to David and the Open Source Software Security Summit from DC.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Hey, I unmuted myself this time. Always a good sign. All right. So last week there was I'm going to read it in a funny way, Open Source Software Security Summit 2nd in DC. Thursday and Friday. The primary purpose was to discuss this thing called the Open Source Software Security Mobilization Plan. I know a number of you had a hand in this, but it's basically an attempt to try to distill some ideas so that at least they can be discussed. Brian and I like to talk about this as version 0.9.1. Hopefully it makes sense, but this is not set in stone. This is just hopefully much better than a blank piece of paper trying to put ideas that people have put around before. Um, it was primarily a meeting between folks in the U.S. government executive branch and some folks within the open source software within the OpenSSF, but well, in industry to participate with the OpenSSF, um, and it goes into three. It was basically starting with 3 goals that were actually from an earlier meeting, and then divided into 10 streams. Stream 7 is especially relevant to this group, but I think there are 3 streams that are relevant to this group. Stream 2 is about a public vendor neutral objective metrics based risk assessment dashboard. Stream 5 is establish the OpenSSF security incident response team. Maybe that's a different group, not sure where that goes. And Stream 7 is about conducting third-party reviews of up to 200 of the most critical open source software components once a year. And there's more to it than that. But of course, that Stream 7, the most critical, the problem has always been, and what do you mean by most critical? And so really this group was created in great part because we know that's not an easy question to answer, but it's still an important one. We want to try to put resources where they make the most sense. It was a meeting between the U.S. government executive branch and industry, but I do want to clarify that the expectation is that this is not unique to the U.S. government or any specific government. We do very much want to float this around to other governments, other public organizations, other private sector organizations. Basically, it's an excuse to get started. So you probably have questions. I probably have an I don't know, but I'll try to answer if I do. And Amir was there too, so I'm not the only one who showed up there. So I saw Amir wearing, I think it was a suit. Do you own one of
Full
those?
suit, yeah.
Oh my
I had to
goodness, I
dust it
didn't even
off,
know you owned
but
one. All right, so questions, and if I don't know the answer, I'll dump it on Amir.
Or maybe the obvious question, who pays?
Who pays? Now, funny as it may seem, we intentionally didn't answer that question. In fact, we didn't even say who does. It's actually kind of hard to get a large number of people to agree on anything. I'm sure this is news to you. So what we decided is, okay, we're not going to be able to get agreement on everything in the universe. So but there was an earlier meeting where they identified these overall 3 goals. To be honest with you, I thought they were pretty good, very, very high level goals. The streams were in many ways based on other recommendations that already exist. We didn't just create everything whole cloth. And then the idea was to drill down just enough to answer the question, what at a high level needs to be done? And that was the goal of that plan, is to create a draft idea of what needs to be done now we did have to answer the question approximately how much effort, how much resources. We estimated in dollars, but I mean, you can estimate number of people. For the most part, it's number of people really, but it's what's the level of effort we estimated with dollars and what needs to be done. Who does it and who pays? That is the discussion as of that day forward. I think from here on, the idea is, first of all, maybe there's tweaks to this plan that need to be made. I mean, it could be that everybody doesn't agree. I think there was general consensus overall. Most of the changes or suggestions were based on extensions or minor improvements, not wholesale rejection. So if we accept that the plan is at least in the right direction, needs to make adjustments, but in the right direction, the answer is both public and private. We're not going to get this by having any one company or any one government paying for it. On the other hand, if you look at the dollars, I mean, if you look at my bank account, that's a lot more money than I have. If you're the US government, this is pocket change. Okay. All of the US, just looking at the US for a moment, all of US society depends on computers. This is a lot less than a lot of other things the US government pays for, especially if we notice, oh, wait, I hear the EU uses computers. At least that's what I hear. Okay. And the UK, I hear they also use computers. And so we'll never get kind of the consensus on terms of how much you should pay versus me. But I think what the goal right now is to get people to contribute and help. Now, to wrap it up, we got $30 million of commitment just from those 2 days, and we weren't fundraising. We were just, here's a plan, and people basically standing around saying, my gosh, we needed a plan that a number of people said makes sense, and it makes sense to us. And dollars started showing up. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we can make more dollars show up. Now, of course, we actually have to execute the plan. I mean, that's the that's the downside of all this, right? You get funding, you have a plan, now you actually have to do the work. But I mean, these are good. This is a good problem to have.
Yes.
So,
and if I could
Is
just
this money only dedicated to the Open Source Security Foundation, or is there other organizations outside the OpenSSF that are getting chunks of this change?
You know what? I probably should have been clear about that. Not only do we not care who pays, we also don't care who gets the money. If somebody else other than the OpenSSF is the right organization to do some part of the plan, that's fantastic. In fact, a couple of the points, really, it's not OpenSSF or even industry's task. There's some things that are really government kinds of stuff, and you'll be, I know I'm the first to tell you, but we're not a government. So, and for example, there's been one of the points that was raised several times on the education track was, hey, although not everybody goes to universities, we should get the universities accreditation requirements changed. I have beat my head against that wall for years. After 10 years, I managed to get them to add the word security. No content, just the word security. Great. Okay, so I'm kind of frustrated and I gave up for a while, but maybe now is the time to just try again. Maybe they'll actually care about security this time. But that's ACM and IEEE. Okay, we're not ACM, we're not IEEE. Okay, we can write emails and letters, but so it isn't just the OpenSSF receiving. It isn't just the folks who were in that room that were HOPE contributing funding. So it is a global plan for global execution. I expect the OpenSSF will implement a lot of it because this is a place where industry has basically decided to collaborate. But you know what? If somebody needs to go to, say, the Eclipse Foundation, great, let's do it. Okay, does that solve a problem? Good, let's do that. Okay, we're happy to work with all sorts of folks.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off that, I thought a great output of the session is really getting more attention and more funding into solving these problems that everybody's facing. So being able to kind of mobilize that and put a plan together and to engage with, all the US government, other governments, the tech industry. I mean, that's great. I mean, there needs to be strong collaboration, and I think this was a good step in that direction. So yeah, so there was a full report released on that. So feel free to look it over, and if anyone would like to discuss any points of it in an upcoming meeting, that would be awesome. It looks like we have a couple minutes left, so I did want to get to the last agenda item about the meeting time. And I guess with that point, I'll run it I'll see what the work group says. I think makes sense to kind of alternate to do, every other session, do a APAC friendly time. Thankfully, it's still, for the most part, within the day for everyone in North America. So I'm totally for it. If there are no objections, I think we can come to a consensus right now on whether we should do that or not. Does anyone have any thoughts or feedback?
Has anybody participated in these?
It might be worth touching base with Dustin or someone in the other working group that was doing this. I think that they ask each meeting whether it's okay, but I certainly would appreciate being able to attend more of these.
So speaking as somebody whose calendar is screwed up because apparently Google hasn't figured out yet how to talk to Microsoft Calendar after 50 years, it would, I think, be preferable from my perspective if we had a fixed alternate time, in other words,
Yes.
every other week or whatever, the schedule, rather than ad hoc and asking each time. And then the other request I would have is that it be actually put in the minutes, because I actually have 2 invites,
Oh, no.
one for 5 and one for noon, and so again, I would just sort of prefer if we, and I'm very supportive of the alternating. I've done that in a number of working groups that I've run. So I think that's the fairest thing. And it's going to, again, if we do it consistently, then I think we'll have the broadest participation as a result.
Yeah, Jeff or David?
Should
Yeah,
our
go ahead.
early time be earlier?
Wait, sorry,
May I
what was
s-
that?
Yeah,
Should
may
the
I
early
suggest a
time be
poll?
earlier?
Do a doodle
Yeah.
poll. We don't. It's a waste of time to try to do this here. So I would say
Sure.
just do a doodle poll and find out the alternate time that works.
Okay.
And it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
have to
think,
be
I
the
think
same
that's
day.
fine. But I would just prefer if we actually do something and then stick to it. So that,
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think
Totally agree.
completely
Totally
agree. Okay,
Yeah.
so we all agree we want to do it scheduled, alternating, and then with times figured out. Oh, sorry, Naveen, you have your hand up.
The scorecard also, I'm gonna suggest this for scorecard also. Obviously, would like people like Caleb showing in for that. So ideally, we don't want to beat on the same day, so we all step on each other. So we just have to work with across the groups to make sure that it is, so that we can have every other week at least. Like this was great because prior to this was scorecard meeting, then after this meeting was there, so it was easy for me to go. So we should probably plan like this.
So I would suggest do a poll to find out what the new date time is for this alternating meeting. Please don't schedule on top of another OpenSSF meeting. That just, let's at least not shoot our own feet. If we and I will actually quickly add, there is actually some work ongoing within the OpenSSF. We've actually contracted with some folks that are used to doing some APAC related outreach, because folks in APAC actually have some other challenges. Obviously, language is an issue and so on. So we are trying to do some other outreachy things to reach out. But this would certainly, alternating times, lots of folks do it. Makes sense. We just got to find that other time and make it consistent.
Yes, and just for any lack of confusion, next meeting time we'll just move, we'll have it at our regular time that we have been meeting until we finalize the new schedule. With that, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Caleb, for the updates, and everybody who participated today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks.